Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. I am James Creppy, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. That's, of course, where you can check out all of our fine Ducks coverage, and there will be plenty more coming this week. Obviously heading into a very big game with BYU, a first top 25 matchup for Autzen Stadium since 2018. I actually had to double check that, and I'd been at all these games, but I honestly thought there was another top 25 matchup since then. But it was the walk-off overtime touchdown by C.J. Verdell against Washington was the last time that the Ducks hosted a top 25 matchup where they were also ranked. So really a big-time game. It should be a great atmosphere. One of only two top 25 games in the country this weekend. So they have center stage in that particular time slot in the middle of the day at 12:30 on Fox to themselves. And again, BYU coming off a tremendous game. We will certainly set that game up and chat with BYU beat reporter Jay Drew later on and get his early insight on the Cougars, who are coming off a just terrific win over Baylor in a double overtime game late Saturday night. I know a lot of folks got a chance to see that, obviously, as well. Briefly to recap the Eastern Washington game, because those who've obviously heard me wax poetic about FCS games before know that I'm no fan of these particular matchups. I don't think they have a particularly great purpose, but be that as it may, the game was played, so we will go over it briefly, but we're not going to put a ton of stock into a lot of things because there's not a lot of stock to put into these kind of games. In the big picture, Oregon wanted to go in with a pretty concise and precise game plan and just focus on execution. It did that. It achieved that. There were no glaring mistakes or errors from a truly big picture standpoint. I'm not talking about every single player because, we don't know every single assignment and, somebody may have blown an assignment here or there, but I'm talking about in big picture in terms of massive turnover issues or just a ridiculous number of penalties or, those sorts of things. There were some miscues. Yeah, special teams, had its moments that were good and had some moments that weren't so good. But those are more, like I say, on the smaller scale. And I'm talking more in the bigger picture when we're talking like the week before. For those who watched the telecast, you saw, the Pac-12 network's talking about 29 missed tackles against Georgia and plenty of other missed issues along the way. Obviously, the turnovers as well. Those were the bigger things. They were not the glaring decision-making issues or tackling issues or those sorts of things. They went in with a clear game plan. No, they didn't throw the ball particularly deep. They didn't have to throw the ball particularly deep. You don't want to show anything you don't have to on film. As a coach, I don't care which side of the ball. I don't care which position we're talking about. You don't want to show anything you don't have to in a game like that. What you want to show on film is basically the same collection of about 10 plays, if you can do it. And maybe a couple of things to either test out and or leave as a little bit of a nugget for somebody else to have to prepare for when you know darn well you're not actually going to use it against them, but just to try and make them waste their time. That's the only thing that kind of a game serves. And 70-14 achieves that in every way imaginable. So don't look at the statistics in a huge way. And I'm somebody who has to, I write up every week what the stats are for where Oregon ranks each week. But again, take it with a grain of salt by way of it's a 2-game sample in the season as a whole. But when one is against the number one team in America and the other is against an FCS opponent who, by my totally objective assessment Saturday, did not come to play that game. Eastern Washington did not come to play that game. That's even more so why I say don't put into it. And why do I say that? Beyond the fact that they got their doors blown off, which that's beside the point. When you pass on 3rd and 1 at your own 34-yard line, and then followed up and punt in a 1-score game at the very beginning. I mean, you're basically telling your guys you have no particular confidence in your offense at that point. So it was a payday game. It served its purpose for both sides. Oregon got to play a ton of players and execute and test some things out. And Eastern Washington got its payday, 1 of 2 on the season. I can only hope that when they go down to Gainesville, that they put forth a little bit more effort in that regard. But to Oregon's perspective, I thought Bo Nix was obviously very accurate. Again, we understand the opponent. We understand the caliber of play. I'm talking about accuracy. I'm talking about decision-making. Obviously, very accurate, efficient. Again, no major glaring mistakes of any kind. Were there a couple of missed opportunities? Yeah, there were. There were. Ones where he completed passes. I know of one in particular. I wrote down all of them, but there was one in particular to the right side. I believe it was to Chase Cota, where he threw to the right side. Pass was complete. But based on the way that the coverage was rotating, the safety had come down towards the receiver who he threw to in the flat, and the outside receiver who was running a slant, if he had waited just a second, not even a full second, a split second, the safety had rolled down to the guy underneath to where if Bo throws to the slant route, that guy's still running. I believe it was Dante Thornton, if memory serves me correctly. Either Dante or Troy, or maybe Hudson. Either way, whoever was on the outside, they had nothing but green grass in front of them. So there were a couple of instances of that. And by a couple, I literally mean like 2. So when you have that kind of an accurate performance, 28 of 33, of those, there was a drop by a running back. There were multiple throwaways. I think there were actually 2 drops in that. So frankly, of the 5 incompletions, I think only 1 was a particularly legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate incompletion by way of throwaways or drops. I mean, if you take that out of the equation, like I say, Nix, I think, only had 1 true incompletion. Now you could say, yeah, but also the touchdown pass to Ferguson got gifted by way of a bobble and stuff. Yeah, but that's part of football. That's part of any sport. Sometimes, better be lucky than good sometimes. No, I'm not going to tell you that was a great pass. No, it wasn't. But hey, it worked out. So, if you're gonna haggle over every single one of those over the course of a season, you're going to be keeping a pretty long tally, of everything that goes against you or for you. So, bottom line, accurate, efficient, good decision making. Were there opportunities for better? Yes, that's part of playing the sport. That's just part of it. But ultimately, in a game like that, what you want is exactly that. Now, had he gone in and been 17 of 33 with 3 touchdowns and an interception, we'd be talking about something different. 28 of 33 with 5 touchdowns. I don't care who you're playing. That's just hard to do. The other team is trying. Even Eastern Washington was actually trying this past week, at least defensively, the players were. Defensively for the Ducks, again, you could obviously see that the tackling was much better. You knew it would be. Yes, there were smaller and slower competitions, so that goes without saying. But 87 passing yards allowed is still, again, hard to do against an Eastern Washington team who is ranked in the FCS and can throw. Their quarterback didn't have a great night statistically, certainly, but against his level of competition, he's a pretty darn good player, or at least has been to start the season. So we'll see how that shakes out in terms of how that ultimately stacks up in the long run. But in the short run, the defense did well. Kickoffs and special teams, I don't want to overreact to too small a sample. We got some clarification from Dan Lanning Monday night that the reason why Camden Lewis took the kickoffs, took that back over again, was Andrew Boyle was a little bit dinged up, according to Lanning. So that's why Lewis took it back over last week. We'll see if that proceeds accordingly. 6 of 10 on touchbacks, which is a pretty good clip. But on the 4 that were not for touchbacks, 3 were returned for basically average returns, a couple for 16 yards, I think, and 1 for 24, 27. But the particularly long return of 47, that was not good. Not just because, it was a long return, what are you going to do? Lewis actually had the tackle on the play. But it got compounded on itself in that the kick was not where it needed to be. Coverage lanes were not good. It gets returned 47 yards, and then it gets capped off to boot with a targeting penalty at the end that puts it into plus territory all the way inside Oregon's 40. And like Lanning said, you can't have that. No, you can't. I mean, can you imagine if that happens in a close game against either BYU this weekend or Utah or UCLA or you name it. I mean, it's going to be a very different kind of feeling. Doing it in a game where you win by, 7, 8 scores is one thing. Doing it in a game in a close moment, that these are the things you have to prepare for. And these are the instances that you have to use and really learn from and get corrected in a hurry. They've allowed a couple of long returns. They've also had a few returns, like I say, were basically average in distance. Oregon also used at least 3 different kickoff formations on Saturday night for those who really pay attention to and get into the weeds of some of the practice of it all, let alone the varying personnel of it. So a lot of things to still work out. Those are the big picture things. To the specifics beyond, obviously, the quarterback play. Cam McCormick in the big picture and in the immediate for the season, for the week, Cam McCormick's moment is what's going to be remembered from this game. If anybody outside those who were playing in the game and their respective families have a particularly long memory of Oregon Eastern Washington more than 5 minutes after the game was over, it will be because Cam McCormick wore number 18 and because he scored a touchdown for the first time since 2017. That's the moment of the night. That's the biggest moment of the game by far. That's what should be remembered in this game. For those who want to, obviously fans want to focus on the big picture stuff and they want to focus on the immediate and they want to talk about quarterback play and all those things. I get it. I totally get it. But in terms of what we're actually going to talk about what happened Saturday night was a 7th-year senior scored his first touchdown since 2017, and he did it while honoring a fallen teammate. That's what Saturday night was about. And by the way, this was not at a charity. This wasn't just a feel-good story. Cam McCormick started that game, and Cam McCormick played really well. Frankly, the entire tight end group played really well. Obviously, Terrence Ferguson catches a couple of touchdowns, the one I mentioned before with the bobble pass early, but he had a couple. First tight end for the Ducks to do that since Jake Breland in 2019 against Stanford. The tight end group as a whole has played really well so far this season. Blocked extraordinarily well. I know against the competition. Trust me, even the leap that Terrence Ferguson and Maliki Mataval have taken in blocking in space compared to last year is enormous already. I mean, it just jumps out when you watch back at the tape and see some of the stuff in slow motion. And again, McCormick and Patrick Herbert obviously were out, the past couple of years due to injury, but seeing them back, seeing them block, catch, you name it, they've been meaningful contributors. Like I say, this wasn't just Cam getting the ball in a blowout game for a moment. He started and played well. And for those who caught it, Pro Football Focus had him as one of the top graded tight ends in the country last week. Now, again, yes, the competition. Again, we'll caveat everything. We understand the competition. We're talking about a 7th-year senior who's barely played in 4 years. Again, I don't care who you're playing. Playing at a high level is still the desired outcome, and Cam McCormick has gotten back on the field and is playing very well so far. So that, to me, is on the story of the night. That is the story of the night. Dan Lanning's first win as an Oregon head coach, Cam McCormick catching a touchdown while honoring Spencer Webb. Those are the stories of the night. And as I say, the tight end play or quarterback play or how the defense tackled it. Yeah, that's sometimes into the weeds, sometimes bigger picture. But in the stories of the night, those are the two big things for sure. In terms of stuff that could carry over to BYU, what little success Eastern Washington did have, particularly on that short field, like I say, after the long kickoff return, was they moved into 20, 21, and 22 personnel, which for those who aren't into the football jargon, that is 2 backs, no tight ends, 2 backs, 1 tight end, 2 backs, 2 tight ends. That's what they scored on the touchdown, on the first touchdown. Vice versa, if we talk about 11 or 12 personnel, it's 1 back, 1 tight end, 1 back, 2 tight ends, 1 back, 3 tight ends for 13 if we get there, etc. So they went into that more on that short possession and threw in some interesting formations that they didn't use as much before that. There was a bunch formation at receiver, which is not in and of itself reinventing the wheel, but there was a clustered 3 split out wide left receiver formation at one point. They also use, it wasn't on that particular possession, but at one point Eastern actually used an unbalanced formation where they had 5 eligible receivers on one side of the formation, which you obviously don't see very often. The running back was to the left of the quarterback, and there were 3 receivers, a tight end, and the running back all to the left of the quarterback. And yes, it was still, a legal formation. There were 2 guys on the line of scrimmage, 3 offset, but it was just highly unusual. Very strange to look at when it came out there. And like I say, those are a couple of things of note, not because we care what Eastern Washington does, but because how that might apply with BYU. They're a shotgun-based offense. They're going to whip the ball around. Jaron Hall is one of the top, in my estimation, one of the top 15, at least, if not top 10 quarterbacks in college football. Forget about his size. I'm not talking about how he translates to the pros. I'm talking about caliber of player at this level. He's got it. Take a look at his efficiency numbers dating back to last season. Take a look at his QBR numbers dating back to last season. He is absolutely up there, and he's got the weapons to use. And BYU can go empty and go 4 and 5 wide sets. BYU can go to, like I mentioned, 20 personnel, 2 backs out of the shotgun. You saw that if you take a look at the highlights from the game with Baylor on Saturday. You saw it. They went 2 backs, 1 tight end, 2 backs, no tight ends. I don't know how much 22 personnel they're necessarily going to use, but at times they might, goal line in particular. So those are sort of the things that Eastern put on tape for the Oregon defense to try to use and apply to both correct for themselves, and also it still applies this week against a much better opponent, a much, much, much better opponent. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of the other positions by way of, production and who did what and you name it, because again, the running backs were all going to get a ton of carries. They did. In a game like that, that's by design. You're not going to lean on any one running back a ton in an FCS game. You win by 56 points. So I'm not going to blow that out of proportion. Who got the ball and the bevy of receivers to catch passes? Same thing. Yes, Troy Franklin obviously had a really nice night. 10 catches, a career high for him. And again, as a whole, I'm not going to get into every single stat line because we'd be here all day for an FCS game where virtually everybody on the roster got in. So bottom line, they achieved what they looked to achieve from the game as a whole, for one, but two, like I say, plenty of things in the small picture, and to take a look and seeing how that looks into BYU. What else may translate? What else may carry beyond? All right, something to correct on special teams. Nix's decision-making certainly back on track, albeit against the competition. And then, like I say, how something that Easton did that may apply. Something else that may apply, frankly, Oregon should hope it applies against BYU, very badly hope it applies against BYU, is Oregon's new version of its dime package. Obviously, this, for those who've followed much of my reporting the past couple of years, I kind of wade into the weeds with some of this stuff and talked about how Andy Avalos's use of that in the 2019 season really helped out, or excuse me, in the 2020 season. Also had a big impact on that defense and the situational awareness and picking up on 3rd and long and the impacts there in 2020. Tim DeRuyter had a different version last year, much more traditional by way of personnel, didn't get too exotic with it. And dime is just 6 defensive backs. For those, again, who aren't into the football vernacular. But nickel is 5, dime is 6. Oregon is using a little bit more of an exotic look under Lanning and Tosh Lupoi in this particular, in their version of the dime. And from what I can see, the player who, and again, we're going on like a 3-play sample, so let's not get too carried away. One play was the early 3rd down, obvious passing situation. That's when they've employed it so far, has been 3rd and long. They haven't relied on it yet on a 2nd down. I think part of that is just because of circumstance and happenstance. I'm sure they didn't want to use it more than they had to against Eastern, for one, because they weren't dialing up a whole lot of exotic simulated pressures either. Again, you don't want to put a lot on tape, and I'm not knocking them for it. You don't want to. And with George, obviously, we know how the game went it wasn't a matter of desire. It was a matter of the way the game was playing out. But from what I could see, one play in dime on the longer third down early against Georgia, and then a couple of instances on third and long. It was like 3rd and 10 or 11 and 3rd and 9 against Eastern. Oregon's dime, Jeff Bossa plays a particularly big role in this because in the first rep of it last week, he starts off at the second level and then pre-snap drops all the way back to basically being the deep center field safety. And that they're playing it differently with 3 deep safeties in their dime. Whereas DeRuiter was playing it much more traditional. And yeah, at times somebody may drift back into coverage, but ultimately the overall safety look was with McKinley and Brian Addison deep splitting the field. Here, they're going with 3 deep safeties. On the first rep of it on Saturday, Bossa drops there, doesn't even start there pre-snap, drops all the way back there, basically on the snap. And on the second go of it, he's in at linebacker, and they went with a different look by way of personnel. And again, some of that was just because of the timing of the game and who was in and whatnot. So bottom line, it's a different look. How does that apply to BYU? Well, again, like we're just talking about, if they go 4 and 5 wide receivers, you have to match that as a defense with an additional defensive back in all likelihood. And that may not always be on third and long, obvious passing situations where you are trying to get some pass rush. You're trying to get and pin your ears back for your pass rushers. You sometimes have to go to dime just based on situation. It may be a 1st and 10. Again, look at those teams that are air raid based and things, and how that might apply also later when you're playing Wazoo, who, by the way, in case you forgot, you're also playing a week later. So some of these things that don't just apply for BYU apply the following week and apply potentially more than just obvious 3rd and 7 plus, 3rd and 9 plus passing situations. Multiple pressures that Oregon got. The sacks, tackle for loss, they got on those obvious passing situations where DJ Johnson, Casey Rogers were able to, like I say, pin their ears back and get to the quarterback. Keith Brown late in a similar situation. So a personnel grouping worth paying attention to. Obviously, everybody wants to, see the defense get sacks and be more productive in that way and every which other thing. Like I say, I don't think they were dialing up a whole lot of simulated pressures and blitzes and stuff because they didn't have to. I think you also wanted to judge and assess, are you able to generate pass rush with 3 or 4? If you drop 7 and 8 more of, over the course of the night, can you hold them under 100 yards passing? They did. And can you be really effective in coverage in that way and focus on that? And yeah, can you just generate rush without needing to blitz? And against an FCS team who, look, Eastern, the one thing I'll give Eastern credit for heading into the game was that you knew that their offensive line was not going to be too bad because they measured up. And it's usually in games like that, sometimes the battle of the trenches is the most obvious, decided advantage. Oregon had an advantage. Oregon did well in that regard. But having said that, Eastern did not get humiliated by its offensive line at all. Not in the least. Yeah, when Oregon got through and generated some pressure and got some sacks and TFLs, particularly in the passing game, it was on obvious passing downs. Well, at times that was because Eastern was trying to go 4 and 5 wide in order to provide more options to its quarterback. So those are those instances that pop up. Otherwise, in terms of what else may apply from this past week to BYU, not a whole lot. Not a whole lot at all. So those are the big ones. To set up and give an early look before we chat, as I say, with Jay Drew of the Deseret News to get his insight on the Cougars. I'm not sure, outside of the fact that it was a late game and obviously people giving some credit where credit is due to BYU winning a ranked game against a really good Baylor team at home and whatnot. I think a lot gets caught up in the ending and kickers making kicks or missing kicks and all those kind of stuff. Hey, the one part that at least I've seen nationally or haven't seen nationally is in the chess game of that game, in the chess match, the game within the game, where Baylor offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes, a two-time Broyles finalist, which is virtually unheard of, much like Dan Lanning was a two-time Broyles finalist, Grimes is a two-time Broyles finalist on the other side of the ball. It is mystifying to most people in the business that Jeff Grimes isn't a head coach yet, and he might be in about 90 days in this next coaching cycle. He is one of the best offensive minds in the game. That is bar none. He might be, as an offensive coordinator, he might literally be the best right now in the game. One up, right on up there, in a non-head coach offensive coordinator right now. He's right up there. Now, he did coach at BYU his first time he was a Broyles finalist, so this is part of it in the context of the whole thing. Him matching up with a team he coached at a couple of years ago against, obviously, coaching staff who knew him well. They played last year, and Baylor put up a whole bunch of points on that defense. A top 25 unit the last couple of years at BYU with basically the same players. And Kalani Sitake and his defensive staff absolutely out-schemed Jeff Grimes and the Baylor offensive staff. And as I say, the game within the game aspect of that, all the credit in the world to Kalani Sitake and his defensive staff. And that is not easy to do. Not at all. And like I say, I hold Jeff Grimes in incredibly high regard, and I'm not alone in that regard. So do not, as a Ducks fan, I can only urge Ducks fans, do not remotely overlook or underestimate this BYU defense at all. At all. They played a very good Baylor team and held them more than in check. And like I say, it's beyond just, the players got to go out and make the plays, no doubt about it. But they generated pass rush. They generated tackles for loss. You could say, well, Baylor had 152 rushing yards. Yeah. But with the 4 sacks, it averages out to 2.9 yards a carry on 52 carries. 2.9. Yeah, BYU couldn't run the ball either. But you know that Baylor's defense is terrific. You know that anything Dave Aranda touches defensively is going to be tremendous. And it was. Hey, they got beaten overtime, 26-20, double overtime, 26-20. It was 20 points in regulation. I mean, it was that kind of a game. But I say, do not remotely underestimate the caliber of defense coming in here to Autzen on Saturday. BYU has been a top 25 unit the last couple of years. And like I say, in the chess match, they absolutely outmaneuvered somebody who, they have knowledge of him. Well, look, he has knowledge of them. And one of the best in the sport. So this is a big time. Yes, on the field, it's big. There's going to be great players on the field. Going to play from Jaron Hall at quarterback to, Christopher Brooks, former Cal running back, who I'm sure many Oregon fans still remember from seeing him for several years now. This will be the last time you finally see him. And we'll see whether or not Puka Nacua, former Washington receiver, comes back off injury. But this is a really talented BYU team, not just offensively. Like I say, defensively. Not a bunch of national household names, not guys who are, on every which award list and you name it. But guys who have put up numbers. Guys who have generated, whether we're talking about just gross production in tackles for loss, a linebackers at interceptions for like 4 years running. That's not easy to do. They've got players. A lot of them. This is a really talented team. Goes without saying, number 12 in the polls again. And just as a last bit before we get to Jay Drew, and we'll touch on it again, I'm sure, later in the week as well. Remember that the term upset is a betting term. I tweeted this out on Sunday, but for those who didn't see, it is a betting term. Upset has nothing to do with what the AP poll says, the coaches poll says, what any other poll says, or your general feelings of things. That is not an upset. Oregon is not attempting to upset BYU. It is the reverse. No matter what the polls say, upset is a betting term. Unless the betting line were to shift even more than it already has and flip all the way around to where BYU is favored, then Oregon would be attempting to upset BYU. Having said that, that's just, like I say, as an aside. That's just basic. That's just statement of fact. I don't care about who's upsetting who or tempted to. This is a huge game. A huge game and a really good game. One of, like I said before, only two top 25 matchups in all of college football this weekend on national television, on Fox. It's got a major stage, major players, major coaches. What more can you ask for? And for Ducks fans who are obviously many coming down from Portland, you got it in the middle of the day, so you don't have to worry about, a super early kick, and you're not getting a night kick, to where you're worried about driving home at midnight or 1 a.m. This is exactly all the things you would draw up by way of setting, stage, standalone TV viewing, caliber of players on the field, and everything else to go with it. The stakes are huge. And again, we'll touch on it throughout the course of the week and all our coverage on OregonLive.com, obviously, and in the Oregonian. You can check us out there. If you don't already subscribe to the podcast, make sure you do. For those who already do, we thank you for that. But if you don't, make sure to do so. So that way it just goes automatically into your feed each and every week. And we'll be doing these obviously throughout the course of the season. We'll also be looking to incorporate more with our Twitter Spaces chats and whatnot. And I hope to do that later this week, either Thursday or Friday, either way. But just giving folks a heads up for those who haven't taken part in those before. Those are obviously a pretty fun deal and interactive, and it's been an organic thing amongst this fan base for going on about 10, 11 months now. So look to engage there, and we'll look to do that, like I say, on either Thursday or Friday, probably Friday, ahead of the game, and do a little bit of a Q&A thing, and we'll interact with folks as always there. So check us out there. Make sure to subscribe, and for those who subscribe, again, thanks again. Give us a 5-star review, like the whole thing, so that way more folks can check us out as well. With that, we will move on to our conversation with BYU beat reporter Jay Drew. And we now welcome to the Ducks Confidential podcast, BYU beat reporter for the Deseret News, Jay Drew, who you can follow on Twitter at DrewJ, J-A-Y. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thanks for having me on tonight.
Well, I appreciate you for fitting us in a busy game week, not only this week, Jay, but obviously last week for you guys. And that's actually where I want to start, beyond the obvious historical context, and people can look up, what a win over a Baylor team at home means for BYU by way of, AP rankings and those sorts of things. But to me, what stands out so much beyond, double overtime and the kickers at the end, we'll get to that. But this was a matchup of some of the best minds on their respective sides of the football in the game. Jeff Grimes is a 2-time Broyles finalist as the offensive coordinator at Baylor. And Kalani's obviously done a terrific job at BYU and has that defense playing at an elite level for a couple of years now. And credit where it is due. I don't think nationally Kalani and the BYU defensive staff have gotten enough credit so far in the last 48 hours. What is it like locally, though? Because to me, that was a matchup of epic proportions from a chess master standpoint. And BYU doesn't just come up on top on the scoreboard. The BYU defense had a absolutely terrific night against one of the best offensive minds in the game.
Yeah, for sure. And your listeners may know this, but Jeff Grimes was BYU's offensive coordinator for 2 years under Satake, and left for Baylor 2 years ago, I think it was. So you have that there. And a lot of credit, I think, has to go to Elisa Tuiaki, who came to BYU with Kalani from Oregon State when Oregon State was when Kalani was Oregon State's defensive coordinator, and Elisa Tuiaki was, I think, the linebackers coach. So they kind of came as a package deal. And you're right, the BYU defense has been underrated for several years now. A lot of people talk about Zach Wilson and then last year what they did with Jaron Hall. But the defense has been the constant throughout pretty much Kalani's 7 years in Provo. So yes, that was a pretty great performance, considering that a year ago in Waco, the Bears put up 38 points and over 575 yards of offense on pretty much the same defense. It's very few guys left, and there's very few additions. So quite a turnaround in 1 year.
How is it that they got the pressure? For those who didn't see all of the game Saturday night, because obviously lots of people caught the end and caught the overtimes and the kicks, but for those who didn't catch all of it, how is it that BYU's defense was able to get freed up to not just say, "Oh, create pressure"? No, they got 4 sacks in the game again against, for folks, and I realize for most fans, they don't get into the weeds of this stuff when it comes to, Broyles finalists and top coordinators and all that kind of stuff. But truly, I don't undersell Jeff Grimes. I can't believe he's not a head coach yet. And he very well might be here in about 90 days in this next coaching cycle. So how is it that the BYU defense was able to generate that volume of pass rush and disruptive plays against a Baylor offense who, like I say, is coached by one of the best?
Yeah, BYU put a lot of emphasis this offseason on playing man defense with their corners, playing pressure man. BYU has rarely been able to do that just because of the type of players they get in the defensive secondary. They played a lot of man pressure defense, which enabled them to free up more linebackers to blitz. And then they put in some exotic blitz packages, frankly, stuff that I haven't seen very much out of BYU. And I think they rattled Baylor's quarterback, Blake Shapen. There were a couple times where he just looked totally confused, didn't know where pressure was going to come from. So I credit Tuiaki, like I said, for that, but also kind of a general upgrade in BYU's secondary and the personnel they have back there, enabling them to be more aggressive on defense and not sit back in zones and that sort of thing.
You mentioned Jaron Hall before, and he is not just one of the better quarterbacks on Oregon's schedule this year. And I wouldn't just say, among the independents, because there aren't that many independent schools left at this point. No, Jaron Hall is just one of the playing better quarterbacks in the country, period. No qualifier. And it goes back to, if you look at his efficiency numbers from last year, if you go back to his QBR number from last year, he's right on up there. What is it that makes him so special? Again, the measurables, all right, maybe he doesn't have the prototypical size by way of height and those things, but short of that, again, at this level, he is right on up there among the top probably 15 quarterbacks in all of college football.
Yeah, he's a really good athlete. Some people don't know that he played baseball for the BYU baseball team for 2 years. A lot like Kyler Murray. He's got that dual threat ability, and he plays with a lot of poise. You don't see him make a lot of mistakes. He doesn't beat himself. He had only 5 interceptions last year in 10 games, and this year he got one in the opener against South Florida, which wasn't really his fault, according to the offensive coordinator. But he's just a really smart, savvy athlete who doesn't seem to get rattled, just always is playing under control and with a lot of poise. And he's got a really good pocket presence. He kind of can sense when pressure is coming. There have been a lot of BYU quarterbacks over the years who were really strong-armed. I'm thinking of like Tanner Mangum and maybe some others, but they didn't have that presence where they could feel the rush. And Jaron Hall definitely has that. He's on his way to some pretty great things. He's been kind of hit with some concussion issues. And he also had a bad hip that he had to sit out the 2020 season. But when he's healthy, he's as good as BYU's had.
And at 6'1" and 205, it's actually pretty unusual to see a situation where he's now in a backfield where his backfield mate on most plays, Christopher Brooks, is actually considerably bigger than he is, though they're about the same height. Brooks is, and again, Oregon fans obviously know Brooks well from his time at Cal. When he went by last name Brown, Chris Brown Jr. Now it's Chris Brooks, and he was Chris Brooks last year for Cal as well, for Ducks fans looking that up. Brooks is 25 pounds heavier than his quarterback, which is not something you see every day. Where the running back, albeit a powerful running back, is considerably larger than the quarterback. How has that duo looked here these first couple of games?
Chris Brooks looked really good in the opener at USF. I think he had 135 yards rushing. He busted off a 52-yard touchdown run on 13 carries. this last game against Baylor, he got 13 carries again, but Baylor's front seven is just phenomenal, and he found the going rough. I think I can't remember exactly the numbers, but it was I don't think he reached 50 yards even on 13 carries. So they bottled him up pretty well. The thing that I think he brings to BYU is kind of a pass catching back out of the backfield. Last year they had Tyler Algier, who's now with the Atlanta Falcons, set the BYU single season rushing yardage record, but he wasn't much of a pass catcher, and that's the element that Chris Brooks gives him is that option out of the backfield. So they're really excited about him. They think he's going to have a really good. This obviously will be his final year, and then he'll move on as a grad transfer. But so far they've just raved about him and what he's been able to do in practice, and how he can break tackles and be so versatile. So sky is the limit for him. That's what the coaches are saying at BYU.
Chatting with Jay Drew of the Deseret News as we get a early look at the BYU Cougars, who come into Autzen Stadium on Saturday to take on the Oregon Ducks in a top 25 matchup in one of the bigger games remaining on the schedule, really, for both teams. There's a chance that BYU might be the highest ranked team, not named Georgia, that Oregon plays the rest of the way with the way it's shaping up. And there's a chance that Oregon will be one of the remaining ranked teams that BYU plays, with the exception of perhaps Arkansas, and if Notre Dame can put it together, but Notre Dame's down to their backup quarterback and already has 2 losses, so we'll see what happens there. So like I say, really a pretty big game for both sides at this stage, and only the middle of September. Tell us a little bit about the receiving core, Jay. I know that Nakua and Romney were out last week. What's the word so far on the possibility of them returning this weekend? And tell us a little bit about Chase Roberts, who obviously had a huge game against Baylor.
Yeah, they're saying today that those 2 receivers you mentioned, Romney and Nakua, are both going to be game time decisions again. It's 50-50. We'll probably know Friday whether they make the trip or not. My sources are telling me that Nakua has a high ankle sprain. He's probably closer to playing. He was really close before the Baylor game. They held him out. They said he was, like maybe 25% or 75% ready, so they held him out. Romney's deal is a little different. He has a lacerated kidney, and so it's one of those things where he has to get cleared by his own medical doctor before he can play football again. I'm obviously no doctor, but that sounds really dangerous to be playing with such a thing. So then as far as Chase Roberts goes, he was a redshirt freshman, highly recruited out of high school, and then he went on a 2-year Mormon mission. So BYU fans and everyone else pretty much forgot about him. Without his play the other night, they just don't win. He caught, I think it was 8 catches for 122 yards, made some spectacular plays, and also threw a touchdown pass on a trick play to Jaron Hall. So he was as good as advertised, as BYU fans found out, and really was a real pleasant surprise because, like you said, those 2 receivers not playing, without him, they would have had to go really deep into their bench. And although they've got some good young talented receiver coming up, those guys are nowhere near what Romney and Nakua are.
Last thing on the offense, Jay, tell us a little bit for Ducks fans who are going to be seeing BYU for the first time, or certainly the first time this season, first time in person, I would imagine, in a hot minute. What to expect by way of the offense, other than, all right, we know some of the players there by name, but schematically, even just taking a look back at the highlights from Saturday, struck me that I already knew that BYU was, a shotgun-based offense and really liked to whip it around. Again, like you mentioned, with Zach Wilson, I knew that for the past couple of years. But it's more than just saying, they're going to go 4 and 5 wide all the time. Quite the contrary. They employed even, it looked like in the highlights I was seeing, even some 2-back stuff, 2 backs and a tight end. So they were throwing all kinds of different personnel packages out there, out of shotgun primarily. But what should Ducks fans be on the lookout for on Saturday? Yeah,
all kinds of different formations. Sometimes they'll even go to the pistol. two back sets. They still use a fullback on occasion. They're really excited about their tight ends. They got three really good tight ends: Isaac Rex, Mason Wake, and Dallin Holker. So they'll go double tight a lot. A lot of they don't do it. They do some empty backfield. They started out that way against Baylor the other night with 5 wides and empty, and it worked very well. But one of the main things we need to talk about is this is probably the best offensive line that BYU has had in Kalani Sitake's 7-year era. Every starter is back, plus a couple of guys who have started in previous seasons. They're really, really big on their O-line. Didn't do so well running the ball against Baylor as they had hoped they would, but it's probably the strength of the offense really is that offensive line. And then, like I mentioned before, the tight ends, BYU has traditionally had a lot of good tight ends over the years, and Isaac Rex caught 12 touchdown passes 2 years ago as a freshman, and he's back. He suffered an broken ankle against USC last year that kind of limited his late season production, but he's a really good player as well if they can get him going. But it all comes down to that offensive line, and I think, like you said, if BYU is going to stay ranked and keep winning, that offensive line is going to have to carry them, especially with these other injuries they've had.
And certainly Ducks fans are familiar with the name Kingsley Suamatia, who obviously was here at Oregon just a year ago, but obviously was hopped in the portal there last September and went back home to be close to home. And he tweeted as much when he made the commitment to BYU. It was home. And that's that you kind of understood from the jump exactly what his motivation was there. So again, I'm sure he'll be looking forward to the trip back to Eugene, and at the same time, some teammates going against him in practice all over again, but now in a far more meaningful spot. Tell us a little bit about the defense, in particular, Jay, by way of the major playmakers. Because taking a look at again, anybody could look at the box score and see guys who stood out from the first couple of games, but who are some of the names, particularly from a pass rush standpoint, negative play standpoint, who Oregon should be, mindful of before the snap? Who are the guys they have to know where they're at and lined up at all times?
Yeah, the strength of this BYU defense is the linebackers. They got Keenan Peely, Peyton Wilgar, Max Tooley, and Ben Bywater when they line up in a 3-4, which they're kind of a multiple front, but they'll go back and forth between a 3-4 and a 4-3. But Max Tooley has been the one this year. He had a pick 6 against South Florida, and I think he had 12 tackles against Baylor. He's a kid, they say, he's kind of a undersized linebacker. He was a safety. He's only about 210, 215 pounds, but he's kind of the guy that's emerged as the playmaker this year. And then Keenan Peely will lead them in tackles. He's the middle linebacker. In BYU's defensive system, the middle linebacker always leads them in tackles. So he was hurt last year in Game 3 against Arizona State. He suffered an ACL injury and was lost for the season, which is kind of why BYU's defense last year kind of went downhill after they beat Arizona State, and Utah, and then they lost Peely and kind of struggled from there on out. The offense had to carry him late to that 10-3 record. But BYU's always had trouble over the years getting pressure on the quarterbacks, and that's kind of been the same. Although you mentioned they had 4 sacks Saturday, they really don't have a true bona fide edge rusher. They have Tyler Batty, defensive end. He left the Baylor game with what they called an abdominal strain. So I'm not exactly sure if he'll be playing this Saturday against the Ducks. He's obviously their best pass rusher. So that would be a big loss if he can't go. And then I mentioned before, this is the best cornerback group that BYU's had because they can, like I said, play that press man defense and not get beat right off the ball. Really speedy guys, D'Angelo Mandel and Caleb Hayes, an Oregon State transfer. So pretty solid defense, not a lot of great playmakers, but a lot of guys who are really solid in their assignments and know what they're doing out there and have been together for a couple of years now.
Last couple things for you, Jay. I mentioned we'd get to the kickers, and obviously that's one of the major takeaways since it happens at the end of the game, and that's the unfortunate part of it for Jake Oldroyd, who misses the final 2 kicks. Obviously, it doesn't come back to bite them, and for that matter, obviously Baylor's kicker missed his in overtime as well. But having said that, 2 for 4 on the night, and the 2 clutch ones that could have put it to bed. And make it a far less exciting finish for everybody. What is the feeling about this kicker right now and the kicking game as a whole? Because, like I say, obviously, you can't replicate that, and you can't say about what they do in practice. It's what they do in that game situation, and this was a home game, and granted, a huge moment for the young man. I feel for him, but like I say, he had a chance to put the game to rest a couple of times and came up short. So, what's the feeling these days on the special teams?
Yeah, they had special teams coach Ed Lamb on today on his Coordinator's Corner television show, and he basically said they're sticking with Jake Oldroyd, that he's their best kicker. They do have a backup kicker named Justin Smith, who saw some action last year when Oldroyd had some back issues. But they're sticking with Jake Oldroyd. 2 years ago, he was a Lou Groza finalist. So I think he went 14 of 15 on his field goals. And last year wasn't quite as good. And then obviously what happened the other night. But he's their guy. They're sticking with him. And it'll be really, really interesting, obviously, when he lines up for that first field goal against the Ducks on Saturday. It's almost like a golfer that gets the yips with the 4-foot putts. I know I've been there a lot, where you just don't know if you can ever make one again. So that'll be really, really interesting, and certainly a storyline to follow.
Last thing is something of the big picture, Jay. Give Oregon fans a sense of, obviously, I can imagine around Provo right now, it's got to be absolutely ecstatic after Saturday night's win over Baylor, and really jacked up about this game coming up. What would another win, and since upset is a betting term at the moment, barring a big shift in the betting line, another upset win, no matter what the polls say, for BYU mean in this case, if they were to get it? And conversely, what would a loss to Oregon mean, in that obviously they're going to still be in the top 25 and still be a great team, but given what the schedule is in front of them, with a win, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, with a win, BYU is not just in the top 10. They could be headed to the top 5 in a hurry, I would think, and with a long runway until that Arkansas game, or at the very least until the trip to South Bend. So what's the feeling like in Provo these days, and the outlook in terms of with a win or a loss in Autzen on Saturday?
Yeah, you captured it. The stakes just, they get higher. That there weren't a lot of people beginning of the season thought maybe they could take down Baylor, but now that they have, this Oregon game is absolutely huge for them. Obviously, as an independent, their only route to the college football playoff, or even a New Year's Six game, is pretty much an undefeated season, and probably even one loss would take them out of it. So they just can't afford a hiccup. Ironically, in 1990, the last time BYU beat a top 10 team at home, they beat Miami, number 1 Miami. And then 4 weeks later, they went to Eugene and got upset by Oregon. I think BYU was number 4 at the time, and the Ducks beat them and kind of just ruined, that season. Ty Detmer went on to win the Heisman Trophy that year, but they were just never the same. So they're obviously hoping history doesn't repeat itself, but listening to a couple of players today, they know what they're facing with that. I think they called it a hostile crowd at Autzen. They know that the Ducks are very, very good. Obviously, they share the same market out here with Utah, so they've watched Utah play Oregon over the years and know how good Oregon has been, with the exception of last year, obviously, as Ducks fans know. But no, plenty of respect from BYU, and obviously they know that the stakes are really, really high, and as long as they keep winning, they're going to keep getting higher.
Again, he is Jay Drew of the Deseret News. You can check him out on Twitter at DrewJ, and certainly check out all his work this week covering BYU ahead of this game with the Ducks, and look forward to seeing you on Saturday in Autzen, Jay.
I'm looking forward too. Haven't ever been there. Should be a lot of fun.
Yes, sir.